When we have authority and we implement the Sharia, you will have no choice but to live under the Sharia one day in Australia. You will have no choice but to live under the Sharia one day in Australia. You will have no choice but to live under the Sharia one day in Australia. You will have no choice but to live under the Sharia one day in
Islam
Australia.
says the state should be controlled by a belief in the supernatural as guided by Muhammad, who was a medieval warlord. It's ridiculous to think that that's suitable for Australia and the freedoms that we hold so dear here in 2015. Reclaim is about reclaiming Australia's future. It's about reclaiming the way that we develop as a nation so that we remain united. Australia has probably got one of the best track records in the world of uniting people from a wide variety of different nations, different cultures, different ethnic backgrounds, different language bases. And we've done a terrific job in bringing everybody together in a very peaceful melting pot here in Australia. And right now, many people are getting the sense that that harmony is under great threat.
The 10 persons will be killed. 10 persons will be
The
killed.
threat is from Islam.
What's the issue with Islam?
Well, Islam pretends that it's a religion, and it's not. It's a totalitarian ideology. It is against freedom.
We don't want freedom, we want Islam and the Sharia. Not
It is completely incompatible with Australian constitutional law, Australian civil and criminal law.
Aussies, skippies, retards, cowards, ferals, Westies and the bogans. So be careful, look out, we're on our way.
It is dogmatic, it is hateful, it's anti-feminine, it's anti-homosexuals, it's anti-freedom, it's anti-children, and it suppresses people generally in a way that is obnoxious to Australian civil and criminal law. We have a terrific track record here in Australia of amalgamating people from all over the world. We all celebrate it greatly. I think we all love it, and we all love the fact that we can get on together so well with each other. But what we have now is Islam that is following a definite isolationist policy. It has done it all over the Western world. The track record is there in the USA, Canada, United Kingdom, France, Copenhagen, Germany. You name any country in the Western world where Islamic people have gone into it, and they create isolated enclaves where they aim to have total Sharia law.
We don't want freedom, we want Islam and the Sharia. Not
And they achieve this in many places. About 85 places in France are Islamic conclaves where the civil authorities don't go. In England right now, under the English law which allows for alternative dispute resolution processes, there are places where young Islamic women have to go, and it's usually to a man, an imam, when they're complaining about things that are happening in their life. They can't access ordinary family law. They can only access Sharia law. And they are told, don't complain, the husband is allowed to hit you, because that's what Sharia law says is allowed.
لعلاج هذه الظاهرة وهذه المشكلة في بالوجه لا يجوز الضرب الذي يؤثر كسرا أو يترك جرحا، وهذا ما نص عليه.
It's only when they build up to something under 10% like in France where they actually get away with murder. And so we believe we've been alerted early enough here in Australia to actually start pointing out what is going on badly wrong here already. In Melbourne, there are 250 child brides in 24 months. These are figures that are collected by the Women's Legal Advice Bureau there in Melbourne. 150 girls every week go into the Sydney Immigration Lawyers Centre and complain about what is happening in their home. These are young girls who are married at between 9 and 12 years old here in Australia. It is happening now. It's against the law here in Australia to be racist in a way that we hear the vituperous vitriol being spoken from the steps of the Mosque of Dikembe. Young boys are now walking the streets of Melbourne, carrying swords, slashing each other and crying out that they are Hezbollah warriors. They are young boys who have been influenced in some way here in Australia, and we reclaim their right to be children here in Australia and grow up before they're influenced by such ideological hysteria. It's the Islamists are screaming it out in Melbourne here in Australia. People like us that need to stand up and stop it now before it gets too much power.
Are you against mosques being built in Australia?
Well, that's a loaded question, and I think it infers that mosques are similar to churches, and they are not. Mosques are representative of the ideological totalitarianism, that is Islam and Sharia. So mosques have been used since Muhammad built his first mosque in Medina. It was a centre of his government, it was a centre of his war machine. It's where he totalitarianised his whole government, took control of everything, and then suddenly started having his visions of God, so that God was on his side as well. Now that's a great system for a one-man fascist system. And so when you say, am I against building mosques? I'm against building mosques where the totalitarian ideology of Islam is sprouted. Every Friday they start with a prayer meeting that says, bring down all kuffars. We either have to submit to the yoke of Islam or they steamroll us. And if you don't get that by now, then you need to do some research.
We don't want freedom, we want Islam and the Sharia. Nada!
Well, the majority of Muslims are just regular people who choose to follow a religion. Why shouldn't they be allowed to follow their religion like every other Australian?
Well, there's two questions in there. One is the assumption that Islam is a religion, and it is not. It's a totalitarian ideology.
Under the Islamic State, we're removing those things. We're removing the nightclubs. We're removing the hotels. We're removing all those disgusting things.
Explain. Religion is but a small part of it. And I agree with you that we need to make sure that we do not attack ordinary Australians who happen to be of the Muslim faith. There is a division between being very accepting and celebrating the idea that Australians can have and be Muslims, but having zero tolerance to those who want to bring in this totalitarian ideological system and tell us what to do.
When we have authority and we implement the Sharia, you will have no choice but to live under the Sharia one day in Australia.
I'd say 10% or fewer who are actually Islamists. They're the ones that are doing the damage. I have mixed with Islamic people since my childhood here in Australia. I've been in the mid-north of the state when the descendants of the Afghans came through. Played 8-ball with them in the local hotel. I've worked for many people of Afghan descent who are Muslims. I get on very well with Australia. It's a multi-faith society. Faith in Australia is private. It is not part of the state. We make a separation of that. We have the Constitution. We have a separation of powers. Islam tries to bulldoze all those things together under one imam. The Grand Mufti of Australia does not even speak English. Now, I think that's because he doesn't see the need to speak English. He feels the need to speak Arabic because he follows the Quran that says, do not mix with kuffars. Do not mix with non-Muslims. Do not make friends with them. No need to learn their language. Why else would 500,000 people who are Australians have a leader who doesn't even speak English? If you look at the evidence that was given to the Canadian Joint Senate Committee by Tariq Fatah, he's a 65-year-old Muslim who clearly loves and appreciates his faith. He says that he went to Canada to escape the tyranny of Islam. Now, I believe that's what many Australian Muslims have come to Australia for, to escape that tyranny. And now they find it being thrust down their throat. Reclaim Australia stands for a unified Australia, and that includes all people, multi-faiths, including Muslims who come here and want to be Australian and want to be part of Australia. They are welcome, and they do not need my permission nor your permission to practice their faith. And a zero tolerance policy towards Islamists who want to have underage marriages in Australia, who want to kill homosexuals, who want to have women's vote be only worth half, who want to have female genital mutilation, who want to have their wife being bashed and to have no recourse to ordinary civil law. It's not an if, it's actually happening already. Young girls are being raped. One man was charged with 25 counts of underage sex in Melbourne. The imam who married him was fined $500 and is subject to being deported from Australia. $500 for actually condoning and consenting what is effectively paedophilia in Australia. If one of my colleagues did that, they'd be in jail, they'd be on the paedophile register, they'd be locked up and wouldn't have the key. Reclaim Australia is trying to bring together ordinary people. It's trying to put pressure on the politicians to say that ordinary people are recognising what is going on here in Australia is the same thing that goes on in every other country where Muslims are only 1.8% of the population. Right now in Canada, they are having these same issues of de-radicalisation programs, not going too well, I might add, because they're generally hijacked by the Islamic immoderates to get the funding or in order to promote Islam instead of targeting ordinary Muslims who we all want to protect. Tariq Fatah gave evidence there, and he says Don't target the mosques if you want to de-radicalise people. Target ordinary Muslims. Go to the barbecue at the school centre. Speak to the parents and teachers who are Muslims there. Ask them how they will de-radicalise people. Don't fund mosques so they can build greater edifices towards Islam. Muslims in Australia are not being targeted. Islam is being targeted. Turnout is expected to be in every capital city in Australia and also major towns. I'm supporting Reclaim Australia. I'm not an organiser. I hear that upwards of 1,000 people are expected here in Adelaide, and it could well be more. I expect that a lot of people who might actually support Reclaim won't come because they're afraid. You see, it's Islamists who use violence and threats of death. Jackie Lambie's already received a letter for even daring to speak out against halal. That's how they work. I promote working within the Australian law. Everything that we do will be legal. Everything we do will be within the bounds of the Constitution of Australia and civil law. There'll be no threats of death to anybody. There'll be no threats of violence to anybody. What we say is you're welcome here in Australia, provided you comply with the law. But in 2014, the Australian Joint Senate Committee actually received, and this was imams were going along and saying, well, we can have Sharia law in Australia as well as Australian law, provided that Sharia law takes precedence where they clash. This is the sort of evidence that's going on, and they enforce it with violence. What we say is the laws of Australia should be enforced. So when they stand up and they spout their bile and vitriol with respect to homosexuals or gays in Australia, this is about unity for the future. What the Islamists are doing are driving apart Muslims who have lived peacefully in Australia since settlement. They're driving them apart from us in order to create a pool for them to radicalise and to Islamicise and to support what's going on overseas. And when they build up in numbers, they will do worse damage here than they're doing right now. And we are the resistors. It's these complicitors that are here now stirring up the pot. I became involved in Reclaim Australia over a slow process, a very strong, proper message to be sent about the dangers of Islam. It's not a religion, it's an ideology. It's a totalitarian ideology. It was set up by a 50-year-old man who set it up to justify his own conquests of his neighbours and his country. He was actually a robber who first made his wealth by robbing other people's trading caravans. And so it is not a religion in the same sense as Roman Catholicism or Judaism, which now happily accepts the separation of faith from the state. That's not what Islam does. Islam says the state should be controlled by a belief in the supernatural as guided by Muhammad, who was a medieval warlord. It's ridiculous to think that that's suitable for Australia and the freedoms that we hold so dear here in 2015. Who can refute such an argument? And yet they stand there and they want to bring it on, and they want to bring it on by violence. And this is why I'm very sympathetic to ordinary moderate Muslims, because I think they are far more fearful of these people than I am. Ordinary Muslims, if they stand up against the ideologies, all of a sudden they don't get invited to weddings or funerals or anything else that goes on in their place of worship. They find themselves ostracised from the community. So when people say we would like to hear more from moderate Muslims standing up and saying these Islamists don't represent us, I say it's unfair to ask them to do that because they're too frightened. The social consequences alone are enough to ostracise them. So why would they put themselves in that place? Look at me, I'm the only one here in South Australia who's saying these things. I will probably be threatened. But freedom is something that every generation has to fight for. And that's why when we say we're reclaiming Australia and Australia's future and its freedoms, we have a duty to hand down to our children the freedoms that our fathers fought for. Islam already threatens Australia's freedoms. Everything that the ideology that is Islam stands for, it tries to bring together the Constitution, it brings together everything that in Australia we separate as powers, we separate our judiciary, we separate our legislature, and we separate also the governments. And we separate religion from those things as well. So Islam is a totalitarian system that brings all those things together with one person at its head. When people criticise our democracy, show us a better system. We vote for our leaders, we can change our laws, we can vote for parliamentarians who will change the laws. You can't vote to change Sharia. Once it's in, it's in.
We're going to rise. We're going to cause the Islamic revolution here in the West because we are the ones. And implement the Sharia, not only in our lands, but everywhere.
You can never stop Islam. You can never stop Islam. From Australia to Asham. From Australia to Asham. From Lakemba to Gaza. From Lakemba to Gaza. From Lakemba to Gaza. From Lakemba to Gaza.
In the east of the east and the west of the west, the Muslims will have authority.
Oh, it's coming. Simple. It's coming. I'll tell you straight. You've got Islam in your country, it's coming.
Pretty much the reason for the rallies is that a lot of people have tried contacting governments, MPs, they just don't listen, so it's ended up this. I would have much rather they just listened and maybe taken some of the things on board.
Have you contacted your MPs or?
Contacted every MP in Australia, me personally, Tony Abbott, everyone. And I know thousands of other people that have as well. They just get the same generic answer every time sort of thing.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it for myself, I'm doing it for my kids.